Great. So I'll give a formal hello since we're recording this now. I'm Megan Fialkoff. I'm the Executive Director for Drug Free World of the Americas. And today we have a very exciting webinar, and I'm going to be introducing our guest speaker. So this came about because it's a long story how her and I got in communication for another day, but basically we were just getting to know each other on the phone. And I was completely, couldn't stop asking questions about what she was talking about. And basically what she was talking about was fentanyl. And of course, I've been hearing lots about fentanyl and this fentanyl, blah, blah, blah. But to me, you know, whether this is bad or not bad or whatever, it didn't impinge on me too much. It was just like, you know, okay, there's all these different drugs and they're all bad. And you know, we have to handle them and, you know, I get in the rut of everyday work that we do. But when I was actually hearing her speak and tell me what's going on and the numbers of people that are being affected by this, it was actually shocking. And I couldn't stop asking her questions. And of course I had to, because it was too much time. And I said to her, look, we're doing a webinar series, and I'm sure many of you have gotten our newsletters. And I said, would you be willing to be one of our guests? And you know, of course she said yes. And that's how we came about today. Okay. So today's webinar is called Everything You Need to Know About Fentanyl. And our speaker is Ruby Javed. She's a PhD. She's the chief of the Forensic Sciences Laboratories Division at the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner's Office. And welcome to Ruby. Where'd she go?
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Well, I'm really excited to be here and to, you know, it's not the best information in regards to what we're seeing. You know, we're involved with death investigation, and unfortunately, fentanyl has been the biggest killer and accidental overdose deaths that we've seen over the past 3 years, but particularly during the pandemic, we're seeing a significant rise in these number of deaths. And something that Megan and I were discussing is just the sheer amount of counterfeit drugs that are on the streets that a lot of people are unaware of. That's not only isolated to the West Coast, but it's a national issue. So much so that the DEA issued a public awareness campaign called One Pill Can Kill in the fall because of the sheer vast majority or significant rise in the number of fentanyl-related deaths here in the country today. I don't know how many of you are aware of what's going on, but when I do these types of presentations and discussions, there seems to be, you know, a misconception that this is still involving prescription, and it's not. What we're seeing today is due to counterfeit pills that are being sold on the streets, but also via social media sites such as Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, whatever outlet that's out there. And because fentanyl is so potent, it's easily transferred, meaning if you think about drug transport back in the day, you need some blocks of drugs, that's not the case anymore. You can transport fentanyl in, you know, FedEx envelopes because it takes such a small amount of fentanyl to create a lethal effect. I'm talking 2 milligrams, which is equivalent to, you know, granules of salt. It doesn't take much to someone that's never been exposed to such a potent drug to get an adverse effect very quickly. And the main point I want to bring again is it's due to counterfeit substances, mainly pills, that are being found all throughout the U.S. But it's being sold as Xanax, oxycodone, you know, these prescription drugs that, and they're actually printing them just like true prescription drugs are. And to the naked eye, for someone that doesn't have a trained eye, you would never know the difference. So people are unknowingly consuming these things, thinking they're getting, you know, whatever it is, anti-anxiety medications or a pain pill, and it looks legitimate. Unfortunately, they're losing their life over it. And one thing I mentioned to Megan when we were talking, this, you know, I work for Los Angeles County, and it's the largest county in the nation, you know, population of over 10 million people. But in 2019, we had about around 450 fentanyl-related deaths. In 2020, it jumped to over 1,100 cases. Now, we'll tell you right now, in 2021, and we're not done testing all of 2021 cases, but we'll surpass 2020 for sure. There'll definitely be over 1,500 cases just based on the tracking that I've been doing, you know, over the past year. We won't get those final numbers until the beginning of May, just because our caseload has increased. And this isn't COVID-related cases. These are mostly accidental drug overdose cases, and it's due to that.
Okay, great. Yeah. So thank you, Ruby, for jumping right into it. So I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to lead some of these and try to speak as loudly as you can, because it is a little bit, the sound is a little bit lower, right? So as loud as you can speak is the best. Okay, great. So first, let's start from the very beginning. So what, okay, if everyone can mute themselves, that would be awesome. So thank you. So tell us where is this fentanyl coming from, and what is fentanyl? Now you're muted. You don't have to mute yourself, by the way. You never have to mute yourself.
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. I see that there's an echo that's coming through. Someone wrote that. I apologize. I usually have a microphone, but it wasn't working. I apologize. I'll try my best. Can you hear me okay?
It's okay. There's no echo. It's okay.
But can you guys hear me okay right now? Is the voice okay? Yes. All right. So for those that don't know, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. So it's a pain management medication that's given typically to those with significant pain management issues, such as those dealing with cancer or those with severe spinal cord injuries. You know, it helps them with their daily pain management. Under controlled settings, dosing is increased over time, because the one issue with opioids is that our bodies become tolerant to them over time. But that's, in controlled settings with a physician. Now, the fentanyl that we're seeing today that started about 5 years ago, but on the West Coast, we really started seeing it 3 years ago. It was starting to become illicitly manufactured in China. And then the Chinese sold it to the Mexican drug cartel. And California, of course, very close to Mexico. And we used to be the hub, like it would come up through Mexico and then mainly be distributed to the East Coast. Ohio's had a huge, issue with drug overdoses involving opioids. That's been the state was the biggest issue for many, many years. However, 3 years ago, we started seeing the rise in the fentanyl-related deaths here. And now it's not going away. So it's coming through Mexico. And I work very closely with the DEA, whereas my goal is to determine cause and manner of death through our toxicology testing. I work very closely with the DEA because their job is to go after those that are selling it on the street. And social media.
Okay, so now tell me, thank you for that. And I'm going to keep directing you, because this was like, as you were talking to me, these were the questions that I had. So if the drug dealers know that it's so potent and people can die, why are they selling it? Like, do you know why that is?
So the dealers typically don't know. So they're distributing it for someone else, right? They're selling it on the streets for, you know, a bigger source. At the end of the day, it's all about money. So they're not always informed of what they're selling. You know, there's instances in which, you know, dealers have been caught, you know, or it's been tracked of who sold a particular substance to a decedent. And, you know, they don't know what they're selling. There are circumstances, if they do know, they're not sharing that information with the buyer. At the end of the day, this is all about money. You know, the drug world is all about making money. And they're not thinking how it's going to impact that end user. It's just about making money.
Okay.
Another question. Why does this, you know, start? You know, why is it continuing? You know, initially there have been theories that Chinese started illicitly manufacturing it as a way of, you know, population control. However, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with dealers and illicit manufacturers, at the end of the day, it's all about making money. And, you know, some people, they survive, you know, they'll survive by taking Narcan, naloxone. But you know, it's a very specific period of time that you can, you know, have that work for you in an overdose situation.
Right.
Majority of cases, though, you know, as I stated, people don't know that they're getting fentanyl. They think they're getting cocaine. They think they're getting Xanax. They think they're whatever it is that they're trying to get. They have no idea that when they're ingesting that particular drug, that it's fentanyl.
Okay. Okay. And one of the things too, I actually don't remember if this was my conversation with you or with someone else. Didn't you also mention there were some people that are taking it and they have the naloxone next to them, and it's just this cycle of, well, that's not necessarily the solution either. Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing, particularly on the East Coast, that, I mean, there's a small window. I know someone asked, like the Narcan, which is an antagonist to an opioid, only opioids. It's very specific to opioid overdoses. You literally have about a 10-minute window. But you cannot inject Narcan.
What is it? I missed that. How much?
10 minutes. I mean, most, and you cannot ingest Narcan yourself. Typically, you need to have someone. I mean, if you're overdosing, you can't. You know, you're not able to do it yourself. You need to have someone there in order to assist you.
Okay. And then, so I'm going to ask you something kind of gruesome, but I do think this is what drives this home. And I did ask you this on the phone, and there's a few questions I have about this, but the first one is regarding what does an overdose death look like from fentanyl, and what is actually happening to the body? And I'm sorry, everyone, this is a little bit graphic, but I do think this is important. So
in the majority of these, you know, fentanyl overdose cases, what we see is most people, basically, you die from your own pulmonary fluid. Pulmonary edema. So your lungs fill up with fluid, and you know, you can't breathe. And what we see is the foaming at the nose and the mouth, because that's the fluid leaving your nasal orifices. So we call it the opioid slump, but that's typically, it happens so quickly. I mean, it's the potency of the drug. I mean, it affects every drug class, affects different systems within your body. And with opioids, particularly if they're extremely potent, it affects your pulmonary system. Whereas stimulants such as methamphetamine and cocaine affect your cardiovascular system. So these drugs act on different sites in your body, but for fentanyl-related deaths or opioid-related deaths in general, it's referred to as the opioid slump. And you're literally, you find the body slumped over, and there's foaming from the nose and the mouth, from their pulmonary fluid leaving the body. So it's a lot of foaming. You know, you'll see bloody discharge, but that's typically what you see.
Wow. Okay. And what have you been seeing? Like we talked a little bit about what you've been seeing during the COVID time period and some even celebrities that died from fentanyl. Tell me like what you've been seeing. You mentioned that those other artists, I guess, who were at a concert, or there were a few different anecdotes you told me that really, for whatever reason, stuck with me, I guess, because this is not, there's nobody that is uh free from the effects of this. Like this can happen to anybody. So tell me a little bit about what you've seen during COVID and some of these more notable artists who have been affected by this. I remember there was one that survived in a group of 3. Tell me a little bit about those.
So the one you're mentioning, this was happened about 4 months ago. I can't remember exact time frame, but this was a group of comedians that were hanging in Venice. One Johnson is one well-known comedian, but they thought they were consuming cocaine. So there were 4 people, at a residence, and they thought they were consuming cocaine. 3 of the 4 individuals, comedians, died. 1 survived, and she's scarred for life. And again, with illicit substances, with counterfeit substances, you're not getting a measured dose. You don't know what you're getting. And it also, it matters how you consume it, whether you take a pill, whether you snort it. Obviously, if you snort, it goes in your veins, you have a quicker effect than if you take a pill. But again, the issue with fentanyl is so potent, honestly, it doesn't really matter how, what route of administration you take. It's so potent. We're seeing, when I review our test results, these toxicology test results, it's so potent that you don't even see it distributed from like your central body, which we take different blood specimens. We refer to it as central specimen location and peripheral. Central is because, your heart, your liver, everything's very close to each other, right? And then peripheral, such as your femoral vein, is away from the central location where all the majority of the organs are. So it's not as effective. We don't even see the distribution occurring. I mean, it means that people are dying so quickly, it doesn't even distribute peripherally. We're seeing higher fentanyl concentrations in the central blood than we are in peripheral. I know that's too much information, but in terms, for me as a forensic toxicologist, when I testify in court, that's really important because it's an indication of potency of a drug. And one of the very first cases I got involved in with federal prosecution was Mac Miller. So he's a big rapper. I don't know if any of you guys know who Mac Miller is. But that was the very first, he was a huge rapper, up and coming. He also thought he was consuming cocaine. And that was the very first case I was involved with the DEA, where the dealer actually knew he was selling cocaine laced with fentanyl, but he did not let him know. And Mac Miller started feeling effects that he doesn't normally feel with cocaine. And there's text messages that show, what did you give me, man? And they were able to prosecute the person. Is you get prosecuted for intentionally selling a fentanyl substance, you're automatically sentenced to 20 years.
Wow.
So was sentenced. He was prosecuted for the death for selling, the fentanyl-laced cocaine to Mac Miller, and there's clear record, through DM messages that indicate that. Tom Petty, he died from fentanyl. He thought he was taking an oxycodone pill. He died from fentanyl as well. No one is, this affects everybody. We had a very big, 12-year-old last year from a prominent sex therapist. Her son bought a pill from Snapchat, and he OD'd at home. He ordered it on a parent's credit card, went to the mailbox, got it, and OD'd at home while his parents were home. And I'm seeing that every day. I mean, this is not celebrities that are really being impacted. These are not, you know, Skid Row or, you know, what we used to think of, you know, certain people only consume these things. This is anyone and everyone. And it's occurring so rapidly. You know, the DEA hasn't created a public awareness campaign in 6 years. And the reason they did the One Pill Can Kill campaign in November and they're pushing it, they're educating people, is because of the fact that this is so out of control right now, all across the US, all across, everywhere. More and more on a daily basis, more and more people are being impacted by it, directly or indirectly.
Wow. So one of the things that also really affected me when I was speaking to you was how many people you're seeing or how many deaths you're seeing per day. I know sometimes we can hear these annual numbers and they're big, and of course they're upsetting when you hear them, but tell me every single day how many you're seeing.
So now over the past 2 years, so typically it's LA. So we get typically about 30 cases per day. These aren't all drug overdoses. I mean, we get natural suicides, homicides. But over the past 2 years, well, especially this past year, we're getting about 60 cases per day.
So you see, that's what really, when I heard that number, that's what really, I was like, we have to have a webinar on this, because if you think about the number of 60, you said 60, right?
Yes.
So 60, someone asked 60, you know, that's 60, someone who has parents, you know, someone who maybe had a job and the people who they interacted with every day, like that's 60 people a day. When I really thought about how many people that affects and what does that really mean and so on, like that's a massive number.
It is. It is a massive number. Like I said, that doesn't include just accidental overdose. That's like everything that we're seeing within the county, but it is a massive number. And, you know, our cases are only those that are considered suspicious or unnatural or natural and have, you know, they haven't been seen by a physician within 20 days of death. That is our job to investigate and figure out what led, you know, to the demise of an individual. But it's what, you know, our caseload, and yes, I do think pandemic obviously has had an impact on what we're seeing. You know, more people staying home, more people losing jobs, more people, you know, having access to these outlets, you know, drugs coming up through Mexico and staying here now, not just being distributed to the East Coast. It's here. It's not going away. You know, it's a scary time. And, you know, my number one goal is to make people aware that, again, this is not, you know, the overprescription of opioids we were seeing, you know, years ago. These are counterfeit, illicit substances that our children are getting their hands on through social media sites, through indirect, friendly conversations that turn into, hey, you want to try something that will ease your anxiety? And, you know, kids are naive, you know. And especially that they're, you know, with them being able to print, you know, make them look like they're legitimate resources. A child's not going to know the difference, you know. If they think it looks like a prescription, I mean, prescriptions are okay, right? You know, it's just, it's people are playing, they just don't know. They don't know. And it's, again, it's unintentional consumption that is unfortunate, leading to the death of more and more people than, you know, we want to see.
Yeah. Okay. So I have some questions from the chat, but I did want to now just talk about one thing, if it's okay with you.
Yes.
So, and we are going to get to these questions. I know there are a lot of questions here. So, one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons that we're obviously hosting this, is because I represent Foundation for a Drug-Free World. And that's how we got in touch. Was Ruby. Ruby and I met through something totally not related to Drug-Free World. And she saw that I run it. So she wanted to find out more about it and, do something bigger, right? And in Foundation for a Drug-Free World, what we do is we educate. So this could be considered a drug-free world activity, right? Because we're educating right now on this webinar, and we're educating the people that then have all of the people that they're in touch with, right? Whether you're a teacher or you're a government official or you run an inpatient outpatient clinic or whatnot. The real answer to all of this is education and prevention. Now, I'm saying that, and we will get to the questions again, because one of the things that Ruby and I were talking about was how there are a considerable number of these people who are, getting high, and they have the antidote next to them, and it's this cycle of they're doing it, but they're doing, they know they can save themselves from the overdose, and it's the cycle. And so I know that that's out there, and of course that really should be the last solution. It shouldn't be what us in society are considering the solution is. That's not a solution. It's just this last approach to saving a person's life. But we're never going to get to the solution if we just keep providing that, right? Like there's people that is coming from taxpayer money, right? There's people who are working to provide for that. So you can't have a growing number of people that are dependent on that, because it's not sustainable. And sustainability is really, I think, the most important thing right now, whether it comes to fast fashion or skincare and hair products and food, and also when it comes to drugs. So what I really wanted to make really evident and clear in this too is that we have to really start prevention education. One of the things that was promised with legalization of drugs was money for prevention education. That isn't happening. So that's why we're also having this webinar, because us as the leaders are going to have to really stick our heads out, and we've got to educate kids. This can't be left behind. Kids are not the last thing on the agenda. We must prevent and educate. And so I think you got the message now, but the point is Foundation for a Drug-Free World, we do provide free drug education resources. We have a curriculum that's free. We have booklets that are free. We have a virtual curriculum, which a teacher can run for their entire classroom, or we have e-courses that can be done by the individual, and they can choose what drug they want to address. Another reason we wanted to hold this webinar is because us at Drug-Free World we're actually collecting all of the research now on this now, so that we can release our own materials on fentanyl. We touch on it a little bit on the website, but we actually need to create our own booklets. But the general topic that this all relates to is the topic of drugs, and the popularity around perhaps using drugs, or the coolness, or the acceptability, or all these various things that a child might grow up with, is something that we as leaders and the celebrities and artists who are involved in what we do have to be communicating about, that you can achieve your goals without using drugs. There's other things you can do to deal with your problems without the use of drugs. And this is something that all of us have to be out there communicating about, because ultimately that is the solution on all of this, and all of those 60 people a day and their families who now will never see that person again. That's it. There's no reversing it. So it couldn't be more important that if any of you are in a position where you can educate and prevent, us at Foundation for a Drug-Free World have these materials free for you that you can order and use to start educating the masses. Okay. So I think you got the point. I do want to go back to the questions now. So one of them I'm just going to answer myself, which is Jeremy Slate, who's done a lot with us. He said, I've heard a lot of it comes from China. And she did say that this did start in China, and that they sold the fentanyl to the Mexican drug cartel, which is now coming in through Mexico. So I'll give you the next question, Ruby, and then you can answer. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So Talia here she's from Foundation for Drug Free World as well. She said, are you seeing those that survive coming out with brain damage?
Some, yes. There are some, and I usually, there are very few cases, I'm involved unfortunately with the death of an individual, but in certain cases, if, there's one other thing we've seen with the fentanyl related deaths, we're seeing more and more multiple body scenario cases. Whereas with, other drug overdose, it's one person, right? But over these past 3 years, we're coming on the scene where we're finding 3 bodies, 4 bodies, because of the impact. So there, in those particular cases, yes, we found individuals. There was one big case a month and a half ago regarding a model and her friend who went out in LA, and they were dropped at 2 different emergency rooms. One became brain dead and one was dead on site when they were dropped. And the perpetrators, they were caught, but they started out the same place. They were given illicit substances. One died immediately. She was dropped at the emergency room dead. The other one was dropped at a different emergency room and was put on life support and ended up dying weeks later.
Wow. Okay. All right. So here's the next question. Are you aware of any educational resources and test kits that can be more readily distributed to folks in need?
So, as Megan mentioned, I know you're providing resources, but the DEA, again, has a public awareness campaign called One Pill Can Kill. If you go to the DEA or just Google it, One Pill Can Kill, DEA, they have a vast amount of resources. Also, I met parents who started their own campaign called Song for Charlie, when their son Charlie passed away from an illicit fentanyl. He took an illicit a pill. He thought he was taking, I think it was Xanax, and unfortunately it was fentanyl. And he passed away from it, and they started their own campaign. Actually, I met them at a DEA press conference, and they're the first parents I've ever met that actually were able to get through to a social media site, which is Snapchat, and work with Snapchat to provide some awareness, to kids that are, checking out these sites and educating them that, they're trying to provide some type of control in Snapchat. So that's a big step for this family. But also there's Get Smart About Drugs, which is great. It's a DEA resource for parents, educators, caregivers.
No, sir, not right now.
Of information for anyone seeking it. That's available at your fingertips.
That's perfect. Yeah, I'm actually going to look that up later as well, because it's really good to know. There's a question here. I don't even fully understand it myself, because there's a word in here I don't know, but it said, this is from Nancy. She says, how long does it take to appear in the femoral blood test rather than only central? So I guess she meant femoral blood system. I'm not sure what femoral is. Sorry.
That's she knows peripheral from central. So she knows what we collect.
Yes.
So obviously, when we collect specimens, because it's a decedent, whatever may be in the system at the time of death and time of collection is what there is. So it doesn't change. My point of bringing that up is typically we collect 2 different sites, because when someone passes away, and I don't want to throw all the scientific wording, but there's something called postmortem redistribution that can impact the drug concentration levels we see in a case. My point of bringing that up is fentanyl is so potent that you see such a higher amount of fentanyl in the central system or central blood compared to the peripheral or femoral blood, because it can't even distribute as quickly. So, it has nothing to do with postmortem redistribution. It has to do with the fact that it's so potent and they die so, pretty much almost instantaneously.
Okay, great. Okay, so another question we had is, so you mentioned 60 a day. Where I don't even know if there was fentanyl 5 years ago, and if there was, how many cases were there 5 years ago, like fentanyl overdose cases?
I mean, I have the stats down. So, I mean, I'll just say, like, we didn't start testing for fentanyl routinely until the spring of 2016. So I'm not even going to give 2016 numbers, but 2017, we had 135 fentanyl-related cases. 2018, we had about 230 fentanyl-related cases. 2019, close to 450 fentanyl-related cases. And as I mentioned, in 2020, we had over 1,100 fentanyl-related deaths. In 2021, our numbers are not finalized, but given you know, the track that I've been monitoring, it will be over 1,500 cases before I get those final numbers.
Wow. Okay, and there's another person who asked what county this is, and the answer to that is Los Angeles. And I know probably most of the people here are from the East Coast, and I would assume that New York has very similar numbers. I don't.
They do, and if you go to NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, you know, they have national numbers, and you can see, I mean, it's, again, the reason the DEA is push this public awareness campaign is because the sheer number of cases that are occurring nationally. It was only an East Coast problem for a long time. Everywhere now, everywhere. No place to stay.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I'm definitely learning a lot. The more times I speak to you, it's quite amazing. We do have one last question here, and then I'm gonna kind of wrap it up for questions, and we'll round this all out. And this is from Jane. Jane, I don't know if Ruby's gonna have an answer for this one, but I will ask it to her anyways. It says here, the medical shows on TV, Chicago Med for sure, have the doctor saying to give the patient fentanyl is the first thing. This further legitimizes the drug itself. Is there any way we can get them to stop doing that? Are there any lines or relationships into TV studios?
That's actually one of, in emergency rooms, they do give fentanyl. You know, if someone comes in with severe pain, again, that's a pain management medication. So that's actually not incorrect information. Again, that's a prescription fentanyl medication when you're in the hospital. What we're seeing in these drug overdose cases are not prescription grade. They're not dose. They're counterfeit. Illicit drug manufacturing. They are not the same thing. But if we get a case, someone's been in the hospital for days or weeks at a time, we actually take that into consideration to decipher prescription fentanyl you know. So we'll ask, if someone's hospitalized, we'll ask for that admission blood sample. Before drug was administered to a patient, we'll ask, you know, if they end up passing away, we'll ask for that admission blood sample so we know what was there before the hospital started injecting their drugs. Because naturally, I mean, the hospital's goal is to save a patient, right? That's their life-saving measures. So that's actually be shown. You know, when they say that, that's actually not false information, that's correct. Because depending on, you know, the traffic accident or, you know, they come in with severe pain, they're going to give them fentanyl to manage that pain and do surgery or do whatever it is. You know, every case is different. But that's actually, you know, but again, that's prescription fentanyl. That's not illicit fentanyl.
Okay. And then I just had a question. They wanted to clarify. So from my understanding, there are you're seeing now 60 fentanyl deaths a day, and that does not include the other overdose deaths. Was that correct?
No, 60 cases in general per day. About half of those I would say are fentanyl.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad we clarified that. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, next question is from Chris, and then we are going to wrap this up because it's almost an hour. It says, is fentanyl incorporated in synthetic drugs or marijuana?
We have seen fentanyl be mixed in with marijuana. It's sprinkled into marijuana because most people think marijuana is safe and it's not. The one thing I want to emphasize here with all of you guys, as leaders, educators, is nothing is safe. Nothing. 9 times out of 10, no matter what you buy through social media or on the street, unless you're getting it through a legitimate pharmacy, doctor, hospital, it is fake. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I don't think people really understand that. So, and most people think marijuana is safe, you know, it's a plant. No, they're sprinkling fentanyl powder on marijuana as well. And the one thing we're already seeing, so, you know, the synthetic fentanyl counterfeit drug rise has been here, but we're also seeing synthetic benzodiazepines. For those of you that don't know what benzodiazepines are, that's your anti-anxiety medication. Xanax, Valium, they're starting to illicitly manufacture those drugs now. And we've seen them in our cases. That is in our world in forensic toxicology, that is going to be, it's predicted to be the next big epidemic in this country. And we're already seeing it in our cases. We're seeing synthetic benzodiazepines come through our office. Not at the same level as fentanyl, but it is here and it's not going away. This is the new market. This drug market, I know there's a wide range of ages here, but when I was growing up, I mean, if it was cocaine, it was cocaine. If it was heroin, it was heroin. If it was meth, it was meth. That's not occurring anymore. You can't trust anything that's on the street. You just can't. And that's what needs to be emphasized. And these illicit drug manufacturers are trying to stay above the legislation or the restrictions. It's not new drugs they're creating. It's drugs that are already there.
Say that last line one more time. It cut out.
Okay, so it's not new drugs that are being created. They're taking drugs that are already there and just altering the chemical structure.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we have one last question. This is going to be a last question, and then we can see if you guys maybe want to have another webinar, we could figure that out. But the last question is, what about people who travel to Mexico to get prescription drugs?
I wouldn't trust it whatsoever. It's being produced mainly in Mexico. So I know a lot of people go to Mexico to get cheaper drugs. Again, I would not trust anything that is not coming through a legitimate source. And the fact that we know that it was, this illicit fentanyl, has been sold to the Mexican drug cartel, I would absolutely not trust anything purchased in Mexico.
Okay. All right, we'll take this last one, but this is really the last one. Okay, no more. If you have more, we'll do another webinar. It says here, are you saying that they are creating new synthetic diazepines, or are they selling Xanax pills with fentanyl in them?
No, they're creating new synthetic, and it's benzodiazepines. That's the class of drugs that Xanax and Valium, they fall under. So there's like alprazolam. I mean, I don't want to throw all the names at you, but they're benzodiazepines. It's alprazolam, Xanax. Xanax is alprazolam. That's the chemical. Again, they're changing the chemical structure. They're adding a fluoride group to it, and now it's called blue alprazolam. And it's a synthetic benzodiazepine. We're also seeing pills that are being sold as Xanax, but it's fentanyl. I'm talking about the next big epidemic that forensic toxicologists predict are synthetic benzodiazepines. And I mentioned it because we're already seeing it in our office. And I know other offices throughout the country are as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. This is like incredibly helpful. I don't know if you guys want to put a little take your screens off and give a thumbs up or some kind, I'll change the view here. I don't know if it changes just for me or for everyone, but if you guys want to put a thumbs up or give a little emoji on your thing, give Ruby some feedback here, because this was pretty, an intense subject to talk about here. We're getting some people in the chat. Thank you. We definitely are going to be planning more webinars. We actually have a webinar that Chris Latham just booked with Michael DeLeon. And if you guys are not familiar with him, Michael DeLeon runs an organization called Steered Straight. He's spoken to millions of kids in the United States at schools, and he's actually going to be speaking on Tuesday, April 5th on marijuana, vaping, and more on fentanyl. This is just in a text message. This is all brand new off the books or whatever you want to call it. So you can save that date. We'll send a newsletter out on that. And thank you all for all of you who are here. I think actually Chris let me know there were a bunch of people coming from throughout the US to this webinar. So thank you for those of you who came on today. We definitely would love your feedback. We'd also love for you guys to go on drugfreeworld.org. I will put the link in the chat. And please check it out. Please check out the curriculum, the booklets, the virtual classroom, the e-courses, and please take advantage of it. If you're a police officer and you want to distribute a booklet to every person in your community, we're ready and available for that. If you want to distribute booklets to every kid in your school, if you want to enroll all of your classes on the virtual curriculum, or you want to order the curriculum and teach them the entire curriculum, whatever you have in mind, these resources are free. We definitely want you to take advantage of that and get them implemented. Okay, this is really how we're going to make change in this country, is through prevention and education. We can't just keep creating more drug addicts and giving them solutions to survive from an overdose, because there will always be a new drug and there will always be a new thing. We've got to prevent this this issue of turning to drugs as a solution or for recreational use. So please do take advantage of that, drugfreeworld.org. And Ruby, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free, Megan, feel free to reach out. It was my pleasure.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. We will see you at our next webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.